ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by City Council next month, and agendas can be found at www.topeka.org. Many of tonight's cases involve public hearings. For those cases, the procedures will be as follows. First, planning staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will hear public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes each. Chris, please take roll.
Mr. Beardmore.
Here.
Mr. Beck.
Here.
Mr. Crook.
Here.
Ms. Cuevas Stubblefield. Here. Mr. Gales is absent. Mr. Haw is absent. Mr. Jefferson.
Here.
Ms. Jordan.
Here.
Mr. Lackey.
Here.
We have 7 members present and a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Item B is approval of minutes from last month's meeting. Are there any corrections?
I had one, Mr. Chairman. Paragraph 4 on page 2 talks about property to the south of the subject property. I think Ms. Sharp confirmed and stated that the accessory building on the property was being removed as part of the construction project, not the property itself. So that's all I had.
It'd be quite an undertaking.
You'd like for that to say accessory building?
Yeah, on the property.
So noted.
Any other revisions, comments?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
We have a move and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed. Item C, communications for Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got just two. One, you've passed out the next week's agenda for the policy meeting. There's 2 items on there, and one, if you want to continue the item tonight, we just allowed for that for next week. There's also an item on there for Heartland Park, which, and I'll just, if it is allows tonight, that might be the only item next week, you are more than welcome to make a motion to add that to our agenda tonight, and we can walk you through it and help you understand it. So, and then the second thing was more of a sad communication. We are going to be losing one of our compatriots at this table. Chris Wickline, our office specialist for the planning department of the last 2 years, is going to be leaving us in a couple weeks, and this will be her last televised meeting. So I wanted to publicly thank you and recognize you as and your professionalism and your commitment to this job. It has made our lives much easier. You've made us look better than we are, and for that, and your like I said, professionalism and excellence in what you do. I want to thank you from all of us, staff, and I know the Planning Commission probably will be sad to see you go as well.
So noted. Thank you.
I would say I heard this rumbling a week or so ago that Chris was leaving us, and at that time I thought the world was ending. So I'm slowly deciding that the world is going to continue, but at a much slower pace. But Chris, I also want to commend you for the job you've done the last couple of years. You've taken care of us, taken care of staff, walked us through this and made it real easy. So I appreciate your service and thank you. And best wishes to what you're going to do in the future.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you.
So now on to much brighter subjects. We will move forward then with item D. Are there any conflicts or ex parte communication on any of the items tonight? Seeing none, we'll move right into item E, public hearing for the zoning matrix. I do want to say, I think what we're going to do tonight as a different, so this being a different process and document that we're going to look at, we're going to go ahead and make it a little more easy to have you all in the audience come up and speak to certain items when Mr. Fiander calls on and summarizes. We're going to go ahead and open the public hearing at this point so that as we go through this step by step, if he has some people that would like to come discuss some of the items, you're feel free to. So public hearing is opened at this point.
Did you want them to raise their hand so that we sort of know to leave them a window to get up here?
Mr. Fiander?
We'll, as the topics come up, we will entertain anybody who wants to come up to the podium per each topic, and they can step forward as normal.
Sounds fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me try and brief you on this. We sent out a lot of paper. We tried to organize it. So you have really 5 things. You have the actual matrix itself. Then you have a next section, which is specific use requirements. That is, yes, and we've labeled those pages. So we'll be referring to some of those tonight. The next section, actually, so specific use requirements for section C at the bottom, you'll see C and then the page numbers. And then we get into section D, which is the definitions. I don't know if that worked out, that was a coincidence. D for definitions. And then we have, after that, the dimensional matrix, which is all of our dimensional standards put into matrix form. And then lastly, we have purpose of zoning districts at the very end. That's F, section F. There's a couple changes to the definitions of the zoning districts there. So with all of that, at some point that all needs to be combined into an ordinance. But we thought this might look a little more friendly to you to look at this way instead. So unless you want me to go through, we've summarized this before. I was just going to hit on some of the changes since you last heard it last month, some of the comment we got from the public, some of the changes that came forth from our discussion last month as well. And so anything new, basically I'll go over. And if you would like to retread something that I am not going over, just let me know. We can get into it. Okay, the first under a residential matrix, the thing we talked about the most last time was the dwelling units on the ground floor. They had a discussion on that for the downtown area, and what staff came back and made corrections to, you'll see in the matrix the zoning districts C5 and D1, which are our downtown districts. We changed it from a permitted use to a provisional use, and then we added the provisions under the specific use requirements, which is page C12, and I'll just read from C12. Dwelling units on main floor must be subordinate to non-residential uses on the main floor. Meaning, if there's an office or a retail use on the main floor, and that's the main use, you may have a unit in association with that on the main floor. And then also, they must, provisionally, they would be allowed in structures that were originally built for use as dwelling units. The structure has been used historically for dwelling units, or the dwelling units were converted from hospital or hotel rooms. So hopefully that covers the essence of what we talked about last time. We did not want to allow just a primary use of residential units on the ground floor, as we talked about. We wanted to have the ground floor be more active and more storefront oriented. Any questions on that change?
Any questions?
I don't know. Do you want to say?
Is that how you would prefer?
Yeah.
Is there anyone in the audience that was wanting to speak on this particular zoning item in the matrix? Okay, seeing none, proceed. Mr.
Okay. The next one has to do with community gardens. That's in the civic and cultural matrix. Again, and I bring this up mainly because this is one of the things that, and it's hard for me to remember how much we covered this, but we definitely received a lot of public comment on community gardens. And this is on the specific use requirements are on C9, and I'm not going to verbatim read those, but we have a page and a half of standards that we've met with the public on, had some dialogue with stakeholders, and I know in this instance there might be some people in the audience wanting to give some input on it. So that's all I had on that one.
Okay. This time we will ask if there's anyone in the audience that wants to speak to the community gardens item. Please come forward. Again, we'll limit our time to 4 minutes apiece. And please state your name and where you live, address, prior to starting.
And while they're coming up, I'll just add for the benefit of those who have not been in our community garden discussion, this is a new use. This is something we don't have in our code now. This mainly, well, not mainly, it only would apply to vacant lots that have, their sole use is for gardens, private gardens. And it doesn't apply to anybody who has a yard, has a house and a yard, and they're doing a garden. That's not what this is about. This is as a primary use of the land is a garden, and that could be in a neighborhood, that could be in a commercial area, it could be anywhere, but it's the only use, it's the primary use. If you have a school or a church or something that's doing a garden, a community garden type thing, that's not what this covers. That's an accessory to the main use, which could be a church or a school. So with that, just set the stage. That's kind of what we've added this as a new use, and it's allowed in any district under certain conditions. There's two types, a type 1 and a type 2, and type 1 is allowed in any district as long as you meet certain size standards, as well as spacing from residential areas. And lastly, only allowed temporary type sales.
Okay.
So
All
try
right,
to hit on
thanks.
everything there.
Guess just prior to we do have the public come up, any questions amongst the board and commission for
Yeah, what was
Sorry.
the definition of temporary sales again, Bill, if you quickly?
Right. Under the, if you can get to that, we could read it verbatim. The sales would have to take place only during the operational hours, which are 8 to 8, and you could not leave up structures after that. They
Okay,
would have to be taken down or removed.
that's good, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah. Did I get that right?
any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, come on up, sir. Apologize for just a bit of confusion there.
Robert Fitzgerald. I live at 1912 Southwest Buchanan. Just a little bit of background on this. Back in October, I went to the Shawnee County tax sale and bought a piece of vacant land here with the idea of perhaps doing some gardening on it. I found out after calling the planning department that the only thing I was allowed to grow on that lot was grass. And that kind of surprised me because it's always been my understanding that, you know, people growing their own food has just been something that they've done since time immemorial. So with that, I contacted one of the great community organizations here in town, which is Topeka Common Ground, and shared with them what I had found out and talked about some of the established existing community gardens in the city of Topeka that were in violation of city code, and suggested that it would be in everyone's best interest if we met with the planning department and kind of talked about an ordinance that at the time we had no idea would be as comprehensive as it turned out to be. And I just want to say that I'm very supportive of this. We met, when I met with Topeka Common Ground, I asked if they had a representative that they'd like to appoint to help me conduct some community meetings, and they appointed Sarah Morse, who I believe will come up and talk a little bit. And she's just been real great at doing this as well, because she has some experience outside of the area working on community agriculture, or urban agriculture and community gardening type statutes, and I'm sure she'll have an opportunity to talk about that. In February, we had after a quick meeting with the planning department, we had a community meeting at the library where roughly 25 people showed up and kind of brainstormed some ideas on what they would like to see. Of course, that was a group of individuals who were very pro community gardens and urban agriculture, but it was great just to kind of make that wish list and share those types of ideas. What came from that meeting, we then met again with Bill and Susan and Bill at different times, and kind of shared the information that we had at that time, some of our own independent research that we had done, and found out that the planning department had been working quite a bit on this as well. We seem to have caught them at a very opportune time, and the ordinance that's before you really encompasses a lot of the things that we discussed at our community meetings. We then had the city hosted a public meeting on that for public comment. Again, we saw several people show up to that. 30, 40 people show up to that. And then, of course, there was an online survey that kind of gauged the community's interest in this as well. And that's 1 minute left, it looks like. So I just want to say that that's kind of the history of where it's at before you, and some of the community involvement. Wanted to share that, and wanted to really share how we find this, how I personally just really support this, and I believe that you're going to hear that from others as well. One thing I want to mention is that I think that the ordinance is really self-regulating, and that's a great thing about it. As far as the size, as far as the sales, the temporary sales, it limits sales to produce that's grown on site. So you're only able to grow so much at any particular time. But what those sales allow for are individuals to recoup some of their gardening costs, and it really, I do believe, affords some economic opportunity in some areas of town that might be suffering from that as well. The availability of fresh produce in these communities is an important thing as well. So, but it's not people trucking in produce to sell. It's stuff that can be grown there. You're just not going to have the kind of problems that you have with a perpetual garage sale. That could be an actual issue. So those are some of the comments I wanted to make, and I'm sure there's others to speak more about this as well. If there are any questions, happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Fitzgerald?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Morse. I live at 422 Southwest Greenwood. As Robert mentioned, I've kind of been following along with this project, and by way of background, as a fellow at the Turner Environmental Law Clinic at Emory University, I had the opportunity to research nationwide urban agriculture practices, and specifically how cities across the country were implementing these policies into their zoning code. We focused mainly on larger cities. We looked at New York, Philadelphia, some of the larger metropolitan areas, but similar principles apply here. And I'm really excited to see that the city is considering incorporating these policies into the zoning code. I'm very supportive of them. I think it really puts Topeka at the forefront of this movement. A lot of cities across the country are considering these issues and adopting them for a variety of reasons: food security, health, beautification, as Robert mentioned, economic opportunities. And I think this proposed ordinance does a great job of addressing those benefits while keeping things in check. I think it does the city's been wonderful about being very thoughtful about what the priorities are and where to permit and kind of place in regulations. So I just want to say I very much support this, and would encourage you all to accept it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Morse? Yeah, not so fast. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hancock. I'm the Horticulture Extension Agent for Shawnee County Extension. I work for Kansas State University Research and Extension. And I am also in support of this ordinance to help things go forward for the community gardens. Through the years that I have been an agent here in town, over 6 years, there were only like 3 gardens publicly really known at that time, and now there's over 25 gardens. So it's a movement that's on the forefront, and it continues to do so as more young people desire to learn how to grow gardens. They think it's novel when we all did it a long time ago. But anyhow, I do support this, although I do have a few questions for clarification and points in this, so I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring those points up. If it's a matter of passing something tonight, there's a few things that I would change in there for sizes and dimensions and signage and a few of those things. So is this a good time to say those
Go right
things?
ahead.
Okay. On the first page, second paragraph, type 1 community gardens, it talks about those that are in excess of 1 acre that should have a 50-foot setback. Well, 1 acre is 210 by 210, so anything larger than that. So we have 2 acres, and you set it back. We're taking off almost an entire acre, so we're moving a 2-acre garden down to a 1-acre garden by a 50-foot setback on 4 sides. I mean, it's unclear, and I think it's an excessive amount of extra space being taken away from that. So I'd ask that that be considered. Later in that, it talks about temporary sales of produce grown on the site. It is, as he says, self-regulating. There's only so much that you can grow there. But the removal every evening of a stand, there's only a short window that tomatoes and corn are available, and to have somebody have to dismantle a little bitty stand, whatever it is, maybe it's a table and an umbrella or it's whatever, but like every night, every day for this little window of time, I think is kind of unreasonable to think that people can have the time to do that, especially when people are working a lot. Just a question on those kind of things. The other thing is when you leave up a sign or you leave up the table overnight, people drive by and realize, oh my goodness, we can buy something here tomorrow. So it's sort of its own marketing level. My question for you said this is only about those gardens on vacant lots. So are they the only ones that pay the $50 fee? And if so, why are they singled out versus any other community garden? And we think that the $50 is kind of high. We'd like to see it down. We like the idea of having all the gardens registered so we know where they are and we can help people, but we think the fee is kind of high. Next page, the operations hours. If you're a gardener, 8 o'clock is already too hot during the day in July and August to be out in your garden. Many of them are out there, the sun's up at 6 o'clock, they're out there working. So we'd like to propose that may put noise restrictions or something so you can't be tilling at 8 or 6 o'clock in the morning. But once the garden is prepared, there really isn't much tilling going on at that time. But people go out early in the morning or before they go to work, and so to start at 8, and then of course have to end at 8 o'clock at night. Some people work till 9 o'clock while there's still daylight when it's cooler again in the cool of the day. So I would extend those hours, but maybe with some noise restrictions on those kind of things. I talked about using only a compact utility tractor, and for the most part that works well, but maybe that first time in the spring when somebody has maybe a little larger tractor to cover an acre with a little bitty tractor is really hard to deal with. Once a garden is established, then generally they don't ever have to do that again, but that first initial time, then maybe once in the spring or once in the fall, or if there are raised beds, then once those are established, you don't need that tractor, but occasionally it's necessary. Signage. Okay, it's okay to have one big sign, but what about the educational purposes for putting signs on plants that help people know what they are? We also have people who donate plants to a community garden who have asked that they have a sign in the garden that says that those plants were donated by this company or sponsored by this company, so that adds more signage pieces. We don't want to make this a big billboard thing, we understand that, but we think the signage thing is limiting. Also, the high tunnel, real quickly, your percentages on these things, 10% or 150 square feet. If there's a high tunnel at all on something, the minimum size of a high tunnel should be somewhere between 10 and 12 feet wide and 15 to 20 feet long. That's way outside your 150 square feet total, plus you have another building to put your tools in. So I'm thinking that that doesn't quite fit for the needs of people who have those. So I hope that covers most of that within 7 seconds. Any questions that you might have for me?
Any questions for Ms. Hancock?
I guess I have one, just in general, from your experience, community gardens. Has there been any negative impacts to neighborhoods, or what are the problem things that typically come up with community gardens?
I have not heard a single negative impact come back to my direction. People generally that are in these gardens are there because they wish to be, and I've not heard of anybody having any difficulties.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Rob Holtz. I'm a transplant to Topeka from Milwaukee, but my wife is a native, and here I am. I'm the Vice President of the College Hill Neighborhood Association, and we've had a fair amount of discussion on the community garden issues. The primary concern that my constituents have is that the gardens will not be kept up and will turn like an eyesore for some of the neighborhoods. I believe this ordinance or this proposal covers all the issues that people would have. There are height limits on weeds, or height limits on all of that. That the ordinance can be enforced, I believe my constituents would be much more happy about perhaps getting a community garden around where they live. So I'm also in support of the ordinance, and I look forward to coming back to my meeting and say, listen, this is what we're working on for Topeka. The council understands what you're doing and address it in this ordinance.
What's your address?
Oh, I'm sorry, 1522 Jewel Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other person wanting to speak for or against the proposed community gardens item? Okay, seeing none, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Fyander and move on to the next revision. Or perhaps we should stop here and have some discussion amongst us on this item. As far as some of the questions that were raised, it might be a good point instead of coming back to it later. Any discussion on the community gardens?
I have a question, staff. What was the thinking on the 50-foot setback? Is that all four sides?
The 50-foot setback, Commissioner, is from residential units, properties that have residential units on them. We initially had a 1 acre maximum for allowed by right, and then we heard from the community trying to do more than 1 acre. There are some very appropriate more than 1 acre community gardens in areas, particularly in areas that don't have houses around them. I mean, there's one in Highland Park like that. But we were also trying to protect against these in the middle of a neighborhood that may become not as self-regulating if they get too large. So we put a cap on so we wanted a setback from existing units, existing residential units. The other way to go would have been just to say if you can't meet the 1 acre standard, you'd have to get a conditional use permit, which is really any standard that can't be met that was just discussed in the type 1, you have the ability to apply for a conditional use permit to exceed that standard. So we were trying to accommodate community gardens that really weren't in the middle of a neighborhood. They were kind of out beyond that, not have any houses around.
So if you've got a vacant lot like the one gentleman had, just about have to get a conditional use permit to put a garden on it. If it's more than 100 foot wide.
If it's over an acre, and which again, the gardens that we have in the middle of a neighborhood, if you go over an acre, then that's where a 50-foot wide buffer is a lot.
Okay, I understand that. What about the ones that are smaller?
Smaller, you don't need a buffer. You don't,
Okay.
anything under an acre is bufferless.
Okay, that's what I wanted, that's what I was trying to get out.
Sorry.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
I guess some of the other items that were addressed was the $50 fee. What does that cover? Basically administration?
Yeah, it's modeled after our home occupation. This is on the edge of being a business in a residential neighborhood. So much like a home occupation where you have a business within your house, we have I believe it's a $50 fee or higher for those folks wanting to establish a business within a residential zoning district, and you have to meet those standards. So that's what it was modeled after, yes, and to help people register and to know what the standards are. That's kind of the whole purpose of registration. The $50 is a lifetime. It's not an annual renewal or anything like that, so it could go with the land, but we do have to have a contact person come back in. So the $50 is really for administration, yes.
Has there been any concern to maintain enforcement if there's now 25?
I don't think there's 25 that are affected by, as a primary use. There are 25 community gardens or however many, but there only were a couple that were primary use of the land. So no, we considered enforcement, and part of that is more often than not, they're accessory to a school or a church or even a park. That would be an accessory. We don't see the proliferation of that was something we couldn't handle.
What about the time frame, the 8 to 8? 'Cause I do agree, some people like to get out when it's cooler, when the crack of dawn at 6. Although you don't want rototillers and tractors fired up at 6 in the
Right.
morning.
Yeah, I mean, if there was that to be further specified, that between 8 and, I mean, look, if you're in a residential neighborhood, there has to be some standard, some expectation that, but then again, the guy next to you could be firing up the roof. The roof contractors could be there at 6 a.m. as well. So I think on an ongoing basis, if there's a garden there day after day after day, yeah, there's a little more expectation that there won't be too much activity, but you could condition it based on nothing. Machinery wouldn't be operated before 8. Yeah, we could specify mechanical operation shouldn't be before 8. It's possible.
Needless to say, if they don't hear you, they probably won't say anything either.
Right.
I understand the limitations, just wanted to touch on the question.
And again, not that this is an easy remedy, but again, if you can't meet the standards, you have the opportunity to apply for a conditional use permit as well.
Any other questions on this item? Hearing none, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. The next,
Thank you all for coming and speaking tonight.
okay. Sorry, let me get back to where we were. Okay, that's nice. The next thing I just wanted to mention is on public utilities. We passed out a few updates that were not included in your packet. Is that right? And it says at the top, key matrix proposed updates, July 21. Under the definitions, you will see public utility facilities type 1 and the type 2. We've updated that definition there was some question, when we sent this out, we got a question actually from our utilities department about, what exactly is a type 1, and is that allow small type, pump stations and booster stations, to exist, by right? So we went, and that, the intent of the type 1 was to allow more unenclosed structures, I guess, was be the best, and that's what so we put in small, on the second line, there's small unenclosed booster pump stations and other similar facilities having minimal off-site impact, located on public property, basically, and operated by public utility, so that it's very specific, well, it's specific as we can get as to what we can foresee in the future, but a small apparatus, needed to, for utility purposes, would be in that definition. If it became a medium or large size, which is what we would consider, usually you have walls and enclosed structure that you walk into and maintain, and there's driveways and things of that nature. So those two definitions were updated. That's new. Any
Well,
questions on that?
How does a electric substation fit in there?
Like a West Star?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the type 2.
okay.
Yeah. The type 1s, again, sometimes those are everything from the electric meter, or the phone, vault in front of, in subdivisions, to gas, pipes that come up out of the ground, to small lift stations or something to that nature. Any wires above the ground, those are not gonna be considered, a type 2. Those will all be type 1. And that doesn't change and that really doesn't change anything, it just kinda clarifies, because this was an age-old question, what's a public utility facility and when do we have to do it? When do we have to get a conditional use permit? So we tried to clarify a little more. But any type 2 can be anywhere, it just needs a conditional use permit. And that hasn't changed.
Any questions on the public utilities? Anyone in the audience wishing to speak to that regard? Okay, well, I think we'll move to the next one.
The next one will jump down under office and commercial. We had a comment from the public on gun ranges, indoor. These are being proposed, these aren't currently in our code, and as we've talked in the past, we are proposing to allow them in industrial districts, I-1 and I-2. We did add some specific use requirements, which are fairly standard in the industry, about not having any audible noise beyond the property lines, and obviously you don't want anything coming through the walls. So those are pretty standard. And the comment that we got was, could we allow these in C4 with a conditional use permit? So we did a little research, looked at some other cities. We know there are some around the nation that are in commercial areas. So that you really have two options if you want to consider that, and we're throwing that out to you. Our recommendation is it would probably be fine from what we saw in other cities. And the conditional use permit in C4, you could case by case look at if that's in an area, and are they applying standards that are appropriate. The industry itself is probably advanced enough now that these are pretty nice. That doesn't mean you'll always get something really nice, but suffice to say, in commercial areas and in the highest intensity commercial areas, conditional use permit could be appropriate. You also have the option, if it doesn't meet, if you just kept it in industrial and they wanted to, they could go into any zoning district with a PUD as well. So there's always that option. And quite honest, so that, I know there's been some interest in doing those here. They're probably waiting on any passage of this to get included, but we've been directing them mostly to industrial areas at this time.
Okay, any discussion on that? Is a conditional use in C4 a good idea, bad idea? Right now in the matrix itself, it's not there.
Correct.
I don't think I'd have any problem with that. Seems, talks about recreational activities in C4, so.
I wouldn't have any problem with it.
I believe that's what my thoughts were, was it's not a hardship in that zoning. Okay, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak regarding gun ranges indoors? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, Bill.
The next updated item was under industrial. Demolition landfills, we had, it was an allowed use in the R1 single family district, as a condition. It was a conditional use. Yeah, I don't think it was just a permitted use in R1. So it was a conditional use in R1. You could come in our most restrictive residential district and apply for a conditional use for a landfill. I think we brought this up last time. We removed that.
Any comments on that change? I believe the removal is appropriate. Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak? Thank you. We'll move on to the next item then, Bill.
Okay, the next item, I'm gonna have Bill, brief you on. I don't think we went over this last time. This is under under our other category. It's dimensional standards. What we did is there's dimensional standards, height, setback, size of buildings in each district. And we just took that and put it into its own matrix form for each zoning district. That is something I don't think you have seen in the past. It was just trying to convert it into that format again. There were some changes along the way that I was gonna have Bill run by you and summarize.
Mr. Hooper?
Good evening. Annie Driver did most of the work on this, so I want to make sure she gets her fair share of credit. If you go to page E1, and that's not for the residential districts there, including RR1, R, and M. We added a maximum building coverage ratio for each of the districts. And on the R2 district, we've had a lot of problems with trying to fit stuff on there because the lots are on the small side in the older part of town. We're proposing reducing the front rear setbacks from 30 feet to 25 feet. And on the M districts, we're adding density limits or dwelling units per acre caps. And this would replace the out-of-date minimum square feet per dwelling unit standards. And if you went across the country, you'll find that no one's really using that anymore. Everybody's been going with density for probably the last 10 years or so. In the M2 and M3 district, we increased the accessory maintenance buildings from 160 to 400 square feet. Any questions on the residential section?
Any questions for Mr. Hoover?
Going over to the next page, which is E3 for the office and institutional and commercial districts. we again added maximum building coverage ratios, including those for accessory buildings. And the maximum size of maintenance buildings were increased. This is one we've had some problems with, where one I could think of specifically, a law office had a ton of hard copies and files back that they put in storage boxes. They want to have their stuff on site rather than in a storage building in case they need to go out to use it. And the only way we could allow it was if they did it with garage doors. So, because the garage is an allowed use. So in this case, it would allow I think they wanted a 400 square foot and they were in commercial, but it was capped at 200. So anyway, this would increase it to 400 square feet in the O&I and C1, and that would go up to 600 square feet thereafter. So we were sort of thinking like the first one, the 400 would replace a modest sized 2-car garage, and the 600 square feet would relate to like a 3-car garage. Going over to E5, which handles the rest of the districts are on here, which includes the industrial, university, medical service, mixed use in the downtown districts. Again, we added maximum building coverage ratios. And then in the I-1 district, we're proposing to have a maximum height limit of 70 feet instead of not having one right now. And that's the key changes we were proposing.
Any questions on those two changes?
Do any of these maximum heights include towers, or is this just structures, buildings?
This would be the principal building, and then some of these things like, I think like silos and towers, those are accessory uses, and then there are exceptions for those things, just like a steeple on a church, for instance.
There's specific height requirements for cell towers, for instance, that are in the cell tower section that this wouldn't affect. 150 foot, for instance, for a cell tower before it goes into a conditional use. So there are, yeah, as Bill said, these are primary buildings. Towers are not buildings, structures.
Any other questions, staff? Hearing none, I think at this point we will go back to those three items then. Basically, maximum building coverage and maintenance accessory building sizes. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak regarding those? Seeing none, we'll move forward.
Last month, although this was in your summary, we forgot to include the actual language from medical service district update. We have been working over the last year with the hospitals on doing a couple of updates to their, really the MS1 district just affects the medical area at St. Francis and Stormont Vale there in the Old Town area. So we were working with them on a couple updates. We included them in the summary, did not include the actual text changes, and that's what I think that was part of the what we passed out tonight at the top of the page. The two changes again, actually, we made another change. It's not on this page. It's in the matrix. The first change was parking. Parking lots are now in the matrix allowed as a freestanding use in the medical service district. And then the second set of changes had to do with signage in the medical service district. It was a little outdated. We did not include illuminated signs. That would be hard to find in the hospital without illuminated signs sometimes. Then we also allowed for a 10-foot monument sign, still kept it at 50 square feet. This is, if you go out there now, there's some directional type signage, monument type signage, that, again, in order to have more clear visibility of the words and the text on signs for people driving in the area. We felt that that was important to reflect that. And then lastly, there is wayfinding within the district itself, so you know how to get to, where to go to which facility. And so this would permit off-site wayfinding signage to direct visitors to medical facilities. And this all revolves around just the medical service district. And on top of that, there was what they'd like to come back and do is really rezone all of their property to MS. So because there's a lot of little pieces of old residential and old office and in there so they don't, and just come back and do it at once. So that was sort of the idea here. So we'd have one big district zone the same thing, and so it just, these rules apply in that district. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question. The wayfinding signs, are they only within the district, or are they outside the district?
Only within the district.
Okay.
That was my question. Took my question. Any other questions? Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak about this one? Okay, seeing none?
Okay, I think this is last thing that I had. We didn't, I don't think I had, no, I did not have this in the summary last time. The X districts had been, the purpose in the X districts was to allow mixed-use areas on an area-wide basis. And we've come across many times where that would be really helpful on individual lots if we could use that zoning. And so we're kind of gonna try to unleash it here a little bit more and make more use of it. So we changed the purpose and the applicability in the back, which would be F5. On page F5, we indicated that it doesn't have to be under mixed-use district definition. The mixed-use districts serve to implement land use plans of the comprehensive plan. So they're not, they've been tied to neighborhood plans in the past, and if we could look at areas that aren't covered by neighborhood plans, we would like to open up the use of this district for really anybody that makes sense. It's a really good transitional zoning, and maybe instead of doing a PUD, where you can have commercial or residential or office residential, you could just rezone it to the mixed-use district, and it would make a lot more sense probably. So that's and as we're updating our comp plan, the ability to do more mixed use and promote that, I think this would come in very handy as a tool that we don't have right now. Any questions?
Any questions?
Would that be applicable to, say, a 29th and Farallon development that may be out there?
Correct. Actually, that's a really good example of somebody that on a larger scale might want to use the zoning district. It's set up, and we may find out that we need to do a PUD, but at least within the PUD, that could be the base zoning, and we don't have to recreate all of our districts. But that would, yes, that would be helpful.
Any other questions on this? Anyone in the audience that wants to speak regarding the X districts?
Hi, my name's Teresa Miller. I'm president of North Topeka West NIA, and I live at 1820 Northwest Polk Street. I don't like to address one person, but Bill, is this what we were talking about earlier this evening? Can I do that?
Mr. Feiner, feel free to respond.
Well, the reason why I'm asking, it's covering a certain area that I and a friend, Paulette English and I went with a committee to change the zoning and things on mobile homes and how they be put on the properties. That wasn't followed. Now I have a nightmare over in North Topeka, not in my district, but it's one that I worked on, and it was a really bad one. And there was some discussion of how we're gonna change some of the zoning on certain mobile home things. Because the way it sits is the problem that we had was that people were buying up small properties, sticking dilapidated trailers on these properties and classifying them as homes and not being done. We changed it where they had to be a slab and be tied down, and we changed a whole bunch of zoning and things like that. They're not, that zoning law now is not being followed correctly. It's kind of whatever time of day that person that's ahead of this decides that's what they want. Couldn't happen because now it's caused a nightmare, if we do it in one place, we're gonna have to do it everywhere because we've already set an example that something could happen. So my main concern is because we set those rules out there, they need to be followed one example, everywhere. Why I'm so stressed out about this, I'm on the code compliance committee that went in and changed and helped change some of the codes on that. I'd like to see the same follow through everything. If, say you've got two different places on different sides of town and it's the exact same thing, but they're not treated the same way. This is what's happening with the trailers and the zoning right now. It's whatever comes up in front of them, whatever mood they're in at that moment, gets changed because now I have, when Bill and I are working on this and when we're having a meeting, I've got an RV sitting on property being classified as a trailer. It's pretty, it's neat, it's got decks and everything else, but that's not a trailer. So now that we have that sitting there, we're gonna have to undo it, make a lot of people mad. If the rules would have been followed in zoning, originally, we wouldn't have to go through this. So when we go changing more zoning, it is in the mobile area department, that kind of scares me because I'm worried about the residential area and the people who live in the residential. So when we change zoning, we need to stick to those zoning laws that have been changed and not modify them to make them sound good, but not follow through with them. So that's basically what I want to say, because right now we have a problem because the rules were not followed. So that's all I have to say. You have any questions?
Any question for Ms. Miller?
Thank you very much.
I will say I completely agree. It should be uniform application throughout. It shouldn't be based on west or north or south or east. Mr. Feiner?
And again, yes, I totally concur. That's absolutely correct. What we're trying to deal with, and when we create, and we're going to be creating new standards and new allowances and new rules, and there's going to be some instances, and this is what Ms. Miller was talking about, maybe one of those where you have some grandfathered uses. We haven't recommended changing anything about mobile homes in this. We went through that already. So those rules definitely apply to new mobile homes, and those are being followed. What we have is an old existing mobile home area, parcel that had some mobile homes on. So how do you treat those under the new rules, or the grandfathered in? So that's one of the struggles we do when we create new rules. As good as they are, we still have to recognize the rights of those that came before the rules. So we're working through that, and we're following up together on that. So.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on that item? Okay, so with the back to the X districts, I guess we're up to date on that one.
That's all I had on the X districts. If there's any questions, otherwise.
Any questions on the X districts? Okay. None.
All right, I am done. The summary, those were the changes that we've made that we want to bring to your attention from last month. As I'm looking through here, we didn't provide a staff recommendation. Staff recommendation would be to adopt these changes in, I guess, I'll just say as presented, because it would be up to Mary and staff to put these in an ordinance form. But again, we didn't want to make that too cumbersome for you. The other recommendation that we talked about, and then any amendments you want to make to this tonight, that for your discussion, but we would recommend approval. We also talked about it last month, and also making a recommendation overall to look at downtown and the zoning downtown. We didn't jump into that. That's a little bigger fish fry to get into. This was attempted to correct a lot of some past lower hanging fruit, if you will. So if you want to make a recommendation on looking at the appropriate standards for a downtown zoning district, that's something you could direct in your recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any discussion with all that we've heard tonight? Any comments? Amendments? I think a lion's share of what we heard comment on was in the community garden side. It's a lot to digest.
On the one comment that was made on that regarding compact utility tractors, those are actually fairly large tractors. Mr. Fitzgerald checked this out, and a compact utility tractor, those can handle a 5-foot wide implement. So look at that came a little bit from some other cities when we were doing that. So we feel pretty comfortable that, you know, maybe a good example if you're not familiar with it, those, remember the old Ford tractors? Okay, that's a compact utility tractor.
That's plenty big.
Yes. John Deere had a line of them as well.
Yes, mm-hmm.
They're in the $14,000–$13,000 range to buy one.
Yeah.
Not that I've looked.
Hey, what about allowing signs to mark the individual plots in the gardens? I know a lot of community gardens have individual plots for each person. You know, what if we allow just like 2-foot signs to mark those? I mean, I doubt anyone would complain, but if it's not in the ordinance, it would be against the rules, so.
I think that sounds like a good idea to me, because last thing you want is confusion, or you know what I mean? If you're a cousin, your cousin's got that, and you're going over to help them, it's like you want to make sure you get the right row.
I figured they'd probably do it anyway. So if we
Yes.
make it allow for it, no one would have a right to complain.
Yeah, maybe 1 square foot of signage or something. It should be.
Probably even be a little smaller than that, dude. 1 square foot.
Yeah, this does.
Individual rows. What size would we want them to be then? 1 square foot?
Not to
Not
exceed.
to exceed.
Not to exceed like 2 foot in height maybe, and 1 square foot of sign frontage or whatever.
And would those be for the purpose of?
Marking each individual's plot within the community garden,
Right. Mark Rose are sponsors.
or mark
And
rows.
she mentioned educational
Right,
too. It's a great time to explain what the plants are.
I don't know that we care what's on
Going
it.
with that, we might need 2 square feet, and so
Right.
they'd be internal, and they don't necessarily,
It's not something you're gonna have to read, riding by it.
No.
You're gonna be walking around it there.
And that's a good, I'm sorry to jump in there,
Yeah.
Commissioner. That's a good point, is our definition of sign, or at least my definition of sign, is one that you can see and read from the public right of way. I mean, if you have to get into the yard to read it, it's not intended to attract or advertise your whatever. So, I have a feeling, and although there's nothing wrong with mentioning it in here, it's probably on the enforcement side of things, we wouldn't even consider those as signs. Just FYI.
So she had mentioned sponsorship and donations, would those need to be within that signage area that you do consider signage?
Yeah, again, if it's intended to advertise your product, your service, your organization, you want that seen, then that's a sign. If it's just small enough that you don't have any, you can't see it from the right of way or the sidewalk, then, or you can't read it, that's really not intended to attract you. But we modeled the signage after, what's out there, and then we've also modeled after some other cities. So, what I will call more accessory signage, I think that's understandable. But again, we have to think in the middle of the neighborhood, what is the expectation? The biggest sign you can have in the middle of your single-family neighborhood is a real estate sign. And that's 4 feet high and six square feet. We're allowing 10 square feet. We don't put a height limit on it. So we have some more allowance than what you would normally expect. So again, there's a balance, but I just bring that up because of the ones that we've seen out there. Don't seem to violate what we're proposing. There's 2 that I can think of right off the top of my head that their signage is well within our standard. And they have a sponsor on it. But for the individual rows, that could be allowed.
Were you gonna add some language about use of power tools early in the morning, or?
Yeah, we were gonna change that to, well, if you want us, we could make an amendment to make it just for mechanical operations, that do not emit noise.
Well, I think it might be appropriate to say nothing louder than what a current model air conditioner would make. Because everybody's got an air conditioner and they run 24/7, so as long as it's not exceeding that, I would see that as being reasonable.
You could use electric weed whacker then, they don't make any more noise than that.
At least that gives you a standard of some sort.
Right.
And this stipulation is for the 8 to 8 timeframe.
Right, and then the other question is, it goes right along with that, did you want to allow the other stuff early, is where we're heading, and do you want to start that at 6 or 6:30 or 7 or?
So I'm not sure why you
I
would
don't know if we
allow
even need a time or
limitation
early
other
or
than
late.
maybe
Just
sales.
put the mechanical limit exceeding an air conditioner cannot be done after 8 p.m. and before 8 a.m.
I don't see an individual leaning over attending to their garden quietly as a hardship on the neighbors outside of those time frames. So I'm on board with strictly for the mechanical side of it.
8 to 8.
And sales.
And sales.
Sales, yes.
Yes, mechanical and sales, thank you.
I didn't see the $50 fee as being excessive if it's one time, so I'm okay with leaving that.
Again, they do have opportunity to recoup it through the sales and whatever, doing that. Any other?
Well, the 50-foot setback was another.
The 50-foot setback, as I understand, applies to anything that's over an acre in size.
Right. And that's from a house.
Well, you say that's from a house, that's from the property line, or that's from the building itself?
If from from a property line that has a house on it, yes, yes.
And her other thing was about taking down the sales facility or table, and I agree that they should be taken down, because I don't think that the community garden's primary purpose is gonna be for sales. I don't think they need that.
That came from some of the other cities, and that was something I found a little bit common, and I put that in there early, and the groups that met, they were okay with that.
Yeah. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Because that may lead us to getting something junky out there. In other
Yeah.
words, what we didn't initially want the temporary sales out there. So then they came up with, we started coming up with this idea, if you have a little desk or table that you fold out with a folding chair, then, and it goes back in your shed at night or in your car trunk, then it would minimize that. But we definitely didn't want a ugly little sales thing that was made out of recycled lumber.
Yeah, you wanna enhance the neighborhood it's in, not detract.
Agreed.
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 The setback issue, I was just kind of looking at the residential setback limits in your matrix here, and it looks like anywhere from 15 to 25 feet is a common setback for our districts. So you could have a house within 25 feet of the property line, right? And on the and that's on the front. On the
Yes.
sides and rear, it's minimal, less than 10 feet. So
Yeah, if you're, I'm sorry to interrupt, if you're across the street, you've already achieved your 50-foot
Understand.
setback, yeah.
I'm just thinking side.
If you're so
side
it's
and
really, it's gonna be a
back.
side-to-side relationship, and yeah, those are 5 to 7 feet is the minimum setback on the sign for a house. So it could be pretty close to the property line.
I'm just wondering, is the garden any more intrusive than a house itself?
Well, the age-old question. We tried to make this as self-regulating as possible. We tried to keep again, an expectation on it that if you're too big, or let's put it this way, if you're doing sales and you're a certain size, because you gotta do sales if you're bigger, so so you keep it small, temper it somewhat, and keep it to the intent, which is a community function. It's not attracting people from other neighborhoods. It's basically serving that neighborhood and in a good way, because we want people to utilize land that's vacant, get people out, talk to each other. That's all good. So we're
So
that-
the ones in town
So the
would
ones
be
in the middle of
smaller
it.
ones and wouldn't apply because it's not gonna be more than 1 acre. Is that
Right.
the?
right. Quite honestly, there is a garden out there right now in Highcrest that is, you go out and it's not in the middle of a neighborhood. It's nothing really around it. And so that was the example of, well, maybe you could go over an acre and not really impact a neighborhood. I mean, so that's where this, so they were about 50 feet. They were across the street from a house. They were also probably 100 feet away from another house. So that's kind of where the idea came from. It seemed to be an unobtrusive type of a use, and even though it was big.
Okay.
And again, I'll just throw out there, if you are gonna be large, have a large garden, I mean, then maybe you are more than just a community garden. Maybe you wanna go through the conditional use permit in a sensitive area. If you wanna do more than what the standards are for type 1.
So what are some other thoughts? So are we okay with the 50-foot setback based on the larger than 1 acre lot size?
Yes.
I think, to me, that seems a good distance. we can look for approval, we can, make amendments with approval. I think what I've gathered is we're, the only change that we have mentioned so far is the mechanical and sales between 8 to 8. Otherwise, no time limit on gardening activity. I don't recall any other amendments from what the staff has put together.
I'll make a motion to approve based on the proposed amendments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Motion.
Mr. Chair, could we clarify, is that just for community gardens amendments? Or is that for?
The motion on the floor is for
For the matrix,
the matrix.
Okay.
with the proposed amendments.
Mr. Chair, I understood it was proposed for the matrix with the amendment, the one amendment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Seconded? Okay.
Yes, Mr. Pioneer. I see you're just anxious here.
No, I just want to clarify, because we talked about another amendment during the discussion, with the, it didn't seem like there was it seemed like there was a consensus, so the indoor gun ranges, adding the CUP and the C4. Did you want to do that as well?
I had that written down.
Yep.
Thank you for bringing this.
Okay.
Would you like to amend your motion?
I will amend my motion to also include the, gun range to C4.
And I'll second that also.
Should we close the public hearing first?
Okay.
Sure. I will, at this point, close the public hearing. Okay, any more discussion on the motion?
Do you have an additional amendment?
Now we have another amendment to the amendment?
I'm sorry. While we're at it, no, we passed out a, that's not it. Thank you. We passed out tonight, updates, a one-page update for the medical service district, as well as the definitions for public utility facilities, that we were recommending for a change. And if you agreed, we would, entertain you to include that in with your motion if so desired.
I thought we included that since it came from staff, but
If you just want to make an inclusive staff amendments, in addition to your two that you want, that would cover, I won't have to talk again.
I'll amend to include those, gun range indoor, C4 permit, or C4 commercial district, as well as medical service district that was presented.
And public use facilities.
And public use facilities, yes. We're good?
All proposed changes by staff.
Yeah. All proposed changes by staff.
I'll continue to second that.
Do we have any others? Before we move any farther forward, do we need a fourth change, or do we have it all covered? I believe we have it all covered with what I have thrown across my table.
We're up to OS4 now, we're getting as bad as Apple.
Any more discussion on the motion that's been seconded? Hearing none, Chris, please call roll.
Mr. Beardmore,
Aye.
Mr. Beck,
Aye.
Mr. Crook,
Aye.
Ms. Clevis Stubblefield,
Aye.
Mr. Gills is absent, Mr. Hall is absent, Mr. Jefferson,
Aye.
Ms. Jordan,
Aye.
Mr. Lackey.
Aye.
The motion passes with a vote of 7.
Definitely want to say thank you to staff. Great job, good hard work. I think these are good improvements that we're going to see and continue. I guess the other piece we didn't talk about is the downtown portion. We could probably discuss that now and have another motion to direct staff to look at the downtown districts a little more closely. Do we want to direct them to do so? I don't even know if that.
I don't think you need a motion for that.
Motion, can we
No.
just direct them?
Just reach a
As-
consensus. that
I would say yes.
As time permits, it's something that we are interested in doing. We don't have to have it done next month.
Thanks.
We don't need to amend the motion.
Good.
Everybody okay with that? Directing staff to that?
Yes.
I think we are. We're on board with that, Bill.
Okay.
Move forward with that.
Okay.
Okay, I think the other item we have on our agenda at this time is an action item for the initiation of the historic North Topeka East neighborhood and Oakland neighborhood rezonings. I assume Mr. Binder is gonna take over on this.
Yes, it's cheaper this way. We've done this in the past, we haven't done it recently, so I'll just, whenever we do a neighborhood plan, there are proposed zoning changes in there. And so we come back with implementation of those. We haven't had to do that for, I think the last one we did was in Highland Park, a couple years ago. So in the Oakland, recently passed Oakland and historic North Topeka East plans, there were a couple rezonings that we were recommending in those plans, and that's what's before you tonight. The first is over in North Topeka East. There are two properties. One is at Lawrence and Quincy, and that is actually a park owned by the county. And we are just proposing, as was in the plan, to change that from X district to open space to reflect the use of a park. The county does concur with that. That is in their long range plans to keep that as a park and for the Noto area. So they were concurred with that. The other property on Monroe, Northeast Monroe and Laurent, is a vacant lot that was zoned R4 for a mobile home. That is now owned by Industrial Chrome, which has a business, large and ever expanding business just down the street there. They own that area. We're recommending to rezone it to X2, which is an industrial mixed use area, which you still have some homes around there.
X2 or I2?
X2. I'm sorry, yeah, X2. Yeah, X2. So the entire block is X2, and the surrounding block is X2. So that was an outlier that we never corrected in years past.